Woke professors panic, now in fear of being fired for teaching DEI. A survey of South Carolina professors shows concern over the impact of legislative measures targeting diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, with many professors feeling it has created a chilling effect on their teaching. Faculty teaching DEI-related courses are worried about potential backlash from conservative students and feel uncertain about receiving administrative support in such cases. So if they get in trouble with their normal students, they're not so sure they're going to get backup from their bosses. Some professors reported on not experiencing issues, while others expressed concern over academic freedom, reproductive rights, and LGBT policies in the state. Some Carolina universities have preemptively removed DEI-related language from their institutions, reflecting growing pressure from state legislatures to downplay DEI initiatives. A few professors relocated to South Carolina seeking better academic environments compared to other states like Florida and Indiana, appreciating a perceived stronger institutional support. There's nowhere for them to hide. State to state to state, these professors will be brought in line. From the South Carolina Daily Gazette, South Carolina college professors worried about diversity, equity, and inclusion backlash, according to a survey. Some South Carolina college professors say legislative attempts to crack down on diversity, equity, and inclusion programs have had a chilling effect on higher education in their state. Quote, this anti-DEI wave is impeding what we teach, mostly because of its looming threat and the unknown of what will be flagged as problematic or eventually illegal, wrote a Hispanic female tenured professor who has taught at one of the state's public universities for more than 5 years. And a lot of these professors can't even conceive of being appropriate with the students. Well, but they could actually just go back to being appropriate. It's not like this hasn't been the way things were just before the last few years. Some of these professors, I'm sure, were way out on a far edge of craziness and teaching their students all kinds of nutty things, but they know how to pretend to be normal. They could just focus and pretend to be normal. Participation in the survey released last week was small in South Carolina, and respondents did not identify where they work, so it's impossible to tell whether the opinions are widespread at any particular campus. Also, some professors indicated they prefer being in South Carolina than other states. The American Association of University Professors in August surveyed about 3,000 college faculty across Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Tennessee, Kentucky, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas, and Arkansas. 120 of the professors who responded, or about 4%, work in South Carolina colleges. The president of the Georgia chapter, Matthew Bodie, led the effort, which began last year after states such as Georgia, Florida, and Texas banned diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts and weakened tenure protections. Those tenure protections are life and death for these teachers. That guarantees they have a job. That guarantees it's hard to fire them. Except in a state like Indiana, for example, which passed a law that said, we don't care if you have a tenured position. We don't care if you have a guaranteed academic freedom position like tenure. If you violate our state standards on teaching students appropriately, you will lose your tenure, you will be fired. That kind of thing is what these guys are worried about, because professors can't just do whatever they want to do in states that have laws like that. When they're tenured, they can get away with it more. And they've been doing this in public colleges and universities, which means they're speaking on behalf of the state. At least that's the argument that Indiana has for their law. When you speak on behalf of the government, you don't have the same free speech when you're speaking to students. Bodie told the South Carolina Daily Gazette this week he wanted to know whether these policies were impacting faculty career decisions. The 2023 survey covered only 4 states, but this year Bodie expanded it to 12 to get a broader picture. One of the questions asked professors to share examples of how changes are impacting their work. Quote, from my perspective, South Carolina public institutions seem to be much better protected than much of the South, according to a white female tenure track assistant professor who wrote in response. Quote, it's night and day from other southern state schools. I simply would not apply to a faculty position in Florida or Georgia, for example, if I wanted to move. Quote, I haven't really seen any impacts at my institution, but we also have a very good relationship with our state legislature. wrote a white female lecturer at a public four-year university in South Carolina for 16 years. A relatively new professor said she moved to South Carolina to get away from politics at a non-Southern state. Quote, I left a tenure-track job in Indiana due to politics and academic freedom. Yeah, you don't have tenure if you're in Indiana, not when you have this law. They can give a college professor tenure, but they're still subject to constant, like every 5-week reviews of what they're saying in their classroom. So there really is not the same guarantee, particularly in Indiana. She continued, it became clear the university was not going to back their faculty. It's the opposite of where I am now. In South Carolina, the university values faculty and does not treat us as replaceable bodies. I feel supported here. Of the South Carolina respondents, 80% taught at one of the state's public four-year universities, and the overwhelming majority were white, 87% to 13% of another race or ethnicity. The survey did not identify respondents by name or college where they work. Quote, faculty teaching race, equity, and inclusion approved courses are nervous of blowback from conservative students for teaching divisive concepts and are not confident of administrative support in the face of student compliance, wrote a white male tenured professor who has taught for more than 16 years at one of the state's public four-year schools. Quote, I ask students not to video record classes out of concern of being placed online and becoming targeted, as this has happened at other institutions, wrote a white female tenure-track assistant professor. If a professor is afraid of being recorded by their students, they shouldn't be saying what they're saying. A bill banning public colleges from factoring applicants' political stances into hiring, firing, and admissions decisions passed the state house but died with the end of session without a vote in the Senate. But some state schools preemptively scrub diversity, equity, and inclusion terminology from their institutions. The University of South Carolina struck the terms diversity, equity, and inclusion from a cabinet-level office in August 2023. It also changed the title of its leader, Julian Williams, to Vice President of Access, Civil Rights, and Community Engagement. 4 months later, Clemson University renamed its own Equity and Inclusion Office, changing it to the Division of Community Engagement, Belonging, and Access. Quote, legislation restricting which subjects we can teach, mandating certain readings, legislators monitoring syllabi, all make it difficult to teach without fear of repercussions, wrote a second Hispanic female tenure professor with more than 10 years of experience at a South Carolina public university. Quote, I'm very mindful of what I teach in certain classes for fear of legislative backlash, wrote a black female tenured track professor who has also taught more than 10 years in a state school. To a lesser extent, respondents expressed worries over tenure, as well as abortion access and LGBT issues. In 2022, State House members filed a bill prohibiting public colleges from awarding any new tenure positions, but the legislation was never taken up. Quote, I do think that I would seriously consider whether or not I wanted to leave if tenure was actually eliminated, wrote a white female professor at a public four-year university. Since last year, South Carolina has banned abortions past 6 weeks of pregnancy before many women know they're pregnant. Quote, I appreciate the survey's focus on tenure, contracts, and academic freedom, but the thing that weighs more heavily on many of us employed in southern states is the lack of reproductive freedom and gender-affirming care, wrote a white female assistant professor at a public four-year university in South Carolina 5 years or less. Quote, many faculty are currently at an age where they're capable of conceiving. Yet we do not have access to proper reproductive care, she continued. I have a daughter, and this is why I'm considering leaving the South. In May, Governor Henry McMaster signed a law banning hormone therapy and surgeries for transgender youth. A sentence in that law prohibits the use of public funds directly or indirectly for gender transition procedures. With all of those things in mind, 54% of respondents said they would not recommend South Carolina's universities to a colleague working in a different state or to graduate students starting their careers in academia. Of those who had the greatest concern about these issues, nearly all said they've applied for jobs in other states and will continue to do so. And in some other really good news, but this author of this article doesn't seem to agree with me. From UPI.com, eliminating diversity programs at colleges and universities will have lasting effects. The author thinks it's a bad thing. I think it's a great thing. Just 4 years ago, following the death of George Floyd, almost every college and university in the U.S. had at least one diversity, equity, and inclusion program. Many had existed long before. These programs range from DEI-related degrees and professional training to resources for culturally, linguistically, and neurologically diverse students. Linguistically diverse students? Yes, there is such a thing. But in the last year and a half, almost every state, 159 institutions, have reduced or eliminated these programs altogether. New legislation in states like Texas and Florida have banned DEI programs outright. In other states, institutions are shuttering programs preemptively to avoid political pressure. This will have lasting effects. In Texas, dozens of professional faculty and staff have already been fired. Minority students have lost access to community groups, cultural centers, and resources. That part I don't like so much, but it should be shared resources, and there are still shared resources available. They're just not race-oriented or sexual preference-oriented. They shouldn't be. They should be available to everyone. Furthermore, following the Supreme Court ruling in 2023 that race could not be considered in admissions decisions, scholarships for students with diverse racial identities have disappeared. Eliminating DEI programs could have serious consequences for teaching and learning. As a scholar who researches the relationship between identity and learning, the author's work has shown that inclusivity is a prerequisite for how students form their identities in relation to the content that they learn. Which is adorable, and it's nice that, sure, if you want to tailor every program to me, let's say Adam Post, the person doing this video, I'm sure I would learn it a little better. Do you want to know where I grew up? Do you want to take that into consideration for how you program all the courses that you would have at a college or university that I might attend? I mean, you could do that, but you can't afford to tailor programs based on people's personal histories or their race or their sexual preference, or you destroy the universal appeal and value of a program. The program should be a fixed program, and the individual needs to learn to adapt to that program, whatever it is. We can't expect society to adapt to us. We have to grow up and adapt to society. The author claims, for example, learning math becomes especially difficult, if not impossible, if a student does not identify positively with the subject. Math identity isn't just based on competency, it's also based on societal expectations, such as stereotypes of who is most likely to become a mathematician based on demographics, including racial, ethnic, and gender identities. Okay, when we learned math in school, it was not at an age that we even knew there was such a thing as a mathematician. Math is something, though, that you do actually have to learn the foundations for. Like, you can't learn a lot in English if you can't read, for example. With math, you do need to understand how to count numbers, and then you need to know addition before you can learn multiplication, and then division and all that. Yes, it's something that's foundational, but if you didn't learn that at an early enough age, it's not because you felt slighted because you might not be a mathematician, because I don't know what mathematicians even look like. Maybe they're white, maybe they're Asian, maybe they're black. I have no idea. I haven't gone looking in my entire life. Never have I even seen a picture of a mathematician, except maybe Einstein was a physicist. He wasn't really a mathematician, so this is absurd. Research shows that black students are more likely to stay in college and earn a degree if they attend a historically black institution versus a predominantly white one. Why? Because learning isn't just about the curriculum offered. It's also about students feeling connected to and supported by their institutions. When institutions represent a single cultural identity, students with minority identities can feel excluded and are less likely to thrive. And this might actually be correct. And if that's correct, and you want to go to a black institution, you can go to a black institution, but you can't turn every college into a black institution, nor can you turn it into a white institution or an Asian institution, nor could you possibly hope in any which way to create it to be a multi-diverse society at a college. Just go to college and do the homework and have a great time while you're there. But you still have to do the work, even if it's not somewhere that you feel like your identity is being represented. In general, how we view ourselves relies heavily on external validation. In fact, child psychologists strongly caution parents from labeling children by their character traits or behavior so that their identities do not become prematurely limited. For learning to take place, students need to identify with the content, which becomes especially difficult when they feel like their identities are not being welcomed in the learning environment. This is, when you talk about early childhood, this is for colleges and universities. I'm sure it's absolutely accurate that in early childhood, you do need to have support from your parents in a nurturing environment. And if you have that, you do better in school and better at colleges and universities ultimately in life. But you can't replace that by having DEI offices at colleges and universities. Effective teaching emphasizes students' identities in order to make important connections with the learning. For example, we know that fewer women graduate in STEM fields than men. This is not because they can't succeed in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, but because they aren't as likely to identify with the field. Actually, it's because women are less interested in STEM fields. Why? Because biologically, that's the way it is. Many studies demonstrate that targeting students with certain identities for support increases their academic performance as well as the performance of other students. More evidence of the link between identity and learning comes from the Gallup-Purdue Index. The large survey of more than 30,000 college graduates measured the academic experiences that most prepared them for life. Near the top of the results, quote, "My professor cared about me as a person." The goal of DEI programs is to make sure everyone feels like they're cared about as a person. The reason we feel like a teacher cares about us as a person is because they're an excellent teacher. It has nothing to do with diversity, and there's no way to replace that with some outside diversity program. What you need is an excellent teacher, but you also have to have a willing student that's going to be focused on what they're trying to learn. Not every student comes to college ready to learn. It can't be the teacher's responsibility to try to reach out to literally every student and make a personal, identified connection with them so that they can succeed. It would be nice if they could, but that's really only for the movies. There are great teachers. There are good and great students. You have to try to be a great student. Eliminating DEI in colleges and universities means further marginalization of students with specific identities who have historically faced discrimination. DEI programs are far on the way out at every level. Even teachers dealing with the subject matter are concerned they're going to get recorded by their students and embarrassed online for what it is that they're doing. And for the students that are recording their teachers, as long as it's allowed by the college or university, they should go ahead and do it. Let these professors know they're on notice. Either teach your classes appropriately or you're going to get fired. Let me know what you think of all this in the comments below. Always love to see your ideas. Please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications, give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you again soon with another story. And if I don't see you, I will miss you.